Herzlich willkommen, liebe Zuschauer, zu einer weiteren Folge von Im Auge des Bruders mit Scott Ritter hier auf unserem YouTube-Kanal Gegenpol. Mein Name ist Monique Stegemann und in dieser Woche haben wir folgende Themen. Putsch in Niger. Plant der Westen eine militärische Intervention? Und schneiden die US-amerikanischen und britischen Kampfpanzer besser ab als die deutschen? Hallo Scott, schön, dass du dir wieder die Zeit genommen hast.
Well, thank you.
Wir springen direkt in die erste Frage und schauen zunächst auf Westafrika. Nach dem Militärputsch in Niger ist Frankreich möglicherweise von einer wichtigen Uranquelle abgeschnitten. In Niger haben zudem neben Frankreich auch Deutschland und die USA Militärbasen, aus denen sie nun ausgewiesen werden könnten. Es kommt daher nicht überraschend, dass der Westen mit einer Militärintervention droht. Gleichzeitig stärken Mali und Burkina Faso Niger den Rücken. Ein Einmarsch des Westens könnte zu einem Flächenbrand in Afrika führen. Was meinst du, Scott? Wird der Westen sich tatsächlich in einen Krieg mit Niger, Mali und Burkina Faso verwickeln lassen? Ist er militärisch überhaupt befähigt derzeit?
Well, first of all, we need to understand this is a very dangerous situation because, as the fact is, the United States has 1,100 troops on the ground in Niger. France has thousands of troops on the ground in Niger. Germany has a military presence. It's also an important geopolitical issue. France has extensive economic interests in Niger. The uranium mines help power France's electrical grid. France cannot lose this source of uranium. This is an existential question for France. So the issue is there a way to peacefully resolve the situation? Right now, the United States, France, and ECOWAS, this alliance, ostensibly economic, but more importantly, a security alliance of West African nations, is demanding the return of the constitutional authority. That is the Nigerian president that was ousted in this coup. That doesn't seem to be something that's going to happen on its own volition. And so the West now has two options. One, to intervene militarily to try and restore constitutional authority, or two, to accept the new reality and try to negotiate a viable outcome, one that would respect France's economic interests, especially in the uranium mines, and two, would sustain the U.S.-led security presence in Niger, which is ostensibly to contain and disrupt Al-Qaeda and ISIS operations in the Sahel region. The United States and France used to have a significant presence in Mali. They've been evicted. Burkina Faso is no longer on their side. What we're seeing is an anti-colonial revolt amongst West African states, primarily states that used to be in the French colonial sphere of influence, and which France retained significant influence over in the post-colonial era. We need to also note that Algeria, while they have voiced insisted that the constitutional order be restored, they have said that any military intervention into Niger, outside military intervention, would be resisted by Algeria, that Algeria would come to the assistance of those who are being attacked. ECOWAS has issued an ultimatum that if constitutional authority isn't restored, there will be military intervention. France has threatened this. Right now, it looks like there's going to be a war. And if there's a war, this is going to be a broader war. This is going to be a war that involves Burkina Faso, Mali, perhaps Guinea supporting. All three of these nations are nations that are suspended from their ECOWAS membership. And so they're forming sort of a counter ECOWAS together with Niger. They all possess significant military power. It's not going to be a pushover. This would be large-scale fighting, which no nation outside of maybe Nigeria is prepared to be engaged with. And the question is, can the United States and France sustain such a military intervention? Are we capable of winning, of prevailing? A large number of U.S. forces will be at risk. The 1,100 troops that are currently in Niger are not sufficient in their own right to have the security necessary in a hostile country. It would require either their evacuation, which the United States does not want to do, given that we just spent $100+ million building a base in Niger, from which we operate drones that we consider to be essential to our security efforts in the region. France, likewise, is not going to withdraw on its own volition. So there's this. A conflict isn't just about West African states driving troops across the border. It's about the United States and France engaging in a major military intervention that would be a distraction from what's going on in Ukraine right now. And the question is, can either nation pull it off? The United States can. The United States has significant military resources. We have plenty of power that has not been projected into Europe that's available for this. The Marine Corps especially has forces capable of doing this. The Army has airborne forces that can intervene rapidly. The Air Force has expeditionary air power that can intervene. France can't do so without American help, but clearly they'll have America on their side. This is a very dangerous situation. I think that we could very realistically see within a week or so a major land war breaking out in Africa, probably the largest land war that Africa has seen in its modern history.
Aktuell befinden sich auch ca. 100 Bundeswehrsoldaten in Niger. Die Bundeswehr ist schon überfordert, den Abtransport ihres Materials aus dem benachbarten Mali zu organisieren. Was würde passieren, wenn es zu einem Krieg gegen den Niger kommt? Würde sich Deutschland daran beteiligen mit 100 Soldaten?
The 100 soldiers are not a combat force. They're capable of combat. I think they will be secured by their American allies. They'll find safety inside the American base, until which time they could be evacuated from Niger. Germany may have small numbers of special forces, special operations forces that could be deployed into the region to assist in the evacuation of German personnel from Niger. But in terms of large-scale military presence and capabilities, Germany is not capable of projecting significant power outside of the German border, especially into Africa. Even if the United States was willing and able to provide the transportation support that would be needed, Germany doesn't have forces capable of accomplishing this mission at this time. So I think the German contribution will be political in nature, not military.
Was wir nun in vielen Ländern in Afrika sehen, die Menschen in Mali, Burkina Faso und Niger zeigen ihren Protest, indem sie russische Flaggen schwenken. Russland scheint also zum Symbol dessen zu werden, was du als antikoloniale Revolte in Afrika bezeichnet hast. Was würdest du sagen, wie hat sich das entwickelt? Hat Russland mit seinem entschlossenen Vorgehen gegen den Westen in Syrien und in der Ukraine eine neue Welle der antikolonialen Revolution losgetreten?
Well, Russia inherited the mantle of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had been involved in assisting the indigenous people of Africa in resisting the colonial deprivations of Western Europe. One only has to take a look at the Soviet involvement in Angola and Mozambique and opposing the Portuguese colonial presence in both those countries. And you've seen there was just a Africa summit in St. Petersburg, and you saw African leader after African leader after African leader acknowledging the positive and constructive and friendly role played by Russia in reaching out to help nations. That Russia doesn't have colonial aspirations. Russia's not seeking to build a Russian empire in Africa. Russia is simply seeking to help people who need help and have a mutually beneficial relationship that's based upon notions of equality that the West doesn't seem to understand. The West doesn't treat Africa as an equal. They treat Africa as subordinate peoples. And many times, especially in the case of the French, they treat them as post-colonial subjects. Again, not as equals. And so, what you've seen in Africa is that Russia has had some success, for instance, in the Central African Republic. The Wagner Group and Russian military advisors have brought about an improvement in the security situation in a way that works hand in glove with the Central African Republic government. They're very well received, unlike, for instance, the French security presence in Mali, which was deemed by the Malian government as being detrimental to their security. This is why the Mali government kicked the French out and invited Wagner in. And you're seeing now, there's a growing tendency upon African peoples to not only reject their colonial or their previous colonial masters, or attempts by the United States to impose their hegemony over Africa, and instead to reach out to Russia for assistance. And Russia appears to be willing and able to provide the assistance, whether it be through economic interactions or through security enhancements, more than likely, which will be provided by the Wagner Group in an indirect fashion. But you're seeing more and more Africans turn to Russia because Russia has been a friend and is behaving in a friendly manner, unlike the United States, France, Germany, and other Western European powers.
Lass uns nun dem Krieg in der Ukraine zuwenden, Scott. Die ukrainischen Streitkräfte setzen vermehrt Unterwasserdrohnen ein, um russische Kriegsschiffe oder Ziele auf der Krim anzugreifen. Bei solchen Angriffen sind stets NATO-Drohnen wie beispielsweise die RQ-4D Phoenix in der Luft, die allem Anschein nach den ukrainischen Angriff koordinieren. Wie können dann westliche Länder allen Ernstes behaupten, sie versuchen, einen direkten Krieg mit Russland zu verhindern?
I mean, it's in any notion that the West is trying to reduce tensions to avoid an escalation of this conflict are absurd in the extreme. The West is not only pouring billions of dollars into building up Ukraine's conventional ground forces, which are being slaughtered as we speak on the battlefield in a futile counteroffensive, but they are also helping the Ukrainians develop unconventional capabilities to strike at Russia. We see this in terms of the drone strikes against Moscow and other targets deep into Russia. These are things that Ukraine could not do on their own. They require the technical assistance of the West, the intelligence, the operational planning, etc. The underwater drones or subsurface drones are the same thing. This is technology that's been introduced into Ukraine by Western powers, more than likely the British, who seem to have taken the lead in working with the Ukrainians in this kind of attack. And these attacks are planned by the British. They are supported with intelligence by the British and the United States, and there's some reason to believe that, at least in certain circumstances, the attacks are actually carried out by the British, which means that they are a direct party to the conflict. And this is a fact. NATO is a direct party to the conflict. You can be a direct party. You don't have to put an armored division on the ground to be a direct party to the conflict. Simply providing weapons makes you a direct party to the conflict. But it's more than that. NATO is actively involved in the fighting. And we see this. Thank goodness Russia is in the business of escalation management. Russia knows what it wants to accomplish, how it wants to accomplish it, and having this conflict expand into a direct military-on-military clash between Russia and NATO will not assist in the fulfillment of Russia's goals and objectives. And so the Russians are, they're forced to tolerate actions that under any other circumstance would be deemed as act of war, or direct act of war by NATO against Russia.
Vor einigen Wochen haben die USA noch vollmundig verkündet, der Ukraine ihre M1-Abrams Kampfpanzer zur Verfügung zu stellen. Nun wurde bekannt, dass bestimmte hochentwickelte und sensitive Technologien vor der Lieferung entfernt würden. Warum wird das gemacht? Wollen die USA verhindern, dass diese Technologien in die Hände Russlands gelangen? Und wie wirkt sich die Entfernung auf die Brauchbarkeit der M1-Abrams aus?
I think it's clear that the United States understands that sending the M1-Abrams to Ukraine at this point in time is guaranteeing that these tanks will be destroyed, and that several of them will be captured intact and exploited by the Russians. This is a reality. This is what has happened to every piece of equipment that's been sent to Ukraine to date. The armor on the U.S. versions of the M1 Abrams tank, the non-export version, has been impregnated with depleted uranium and other technologies or technological advances that we don't want to share with Russia. And if you send this tank to Ukraine, the Russians will gain access to this. The same thing with some of the electronics and the fire control systems, et cetera. They're advanced. We don't want the Russians to know about it. If we give it to the Ukrainians, the Russians will know about it. So we're giving the Ukrainians literally rolling coffins. We're giving them tanks that we acknowledge indirectly that even if we sent them with all the bells and whistles attached, we know what's going to happen. They're going to be destroyed and captured by the Russians. That's why we're taking off the bells and whistles. And so if you're the Ukrainians and you're receiving this tank and you say, well, wait a minute, if you're worried about the bells and whistles being captured by the Russians, why are you giving us the tanks that don't have the bells and whistles? Because it's a guarantee they're going to be destroyed. And the United States knows they're going to be destroyed. This is purely political. This is the sick political game being played by the West. Germany played it with the Leopard tank. The Germans knew that they were sending death traps to the Ukrainians. They sent them anyways. They've sent Marder infantry fighting vehicles, death traps. We've sent, Bradley infantry fighting vehicles dating back to to Operation Desert Storm over 30 years ago. They're death traps. And now we're going to give them M1 Abrams tanks that even if they had everything on them that they should, are death traps. We know this. We acknowledge this because we're taking off the stuff we don't want the Russians to see. If we were so confident in the Abrams' ability to survive on the battlefield, we should give them the bells and whistles, because that means that we believe that the Ukrainians will dominate the battlefield, will control the battlefield. Even if a tank is destroyed, it'll be destroyed in a manner which is recoverable by the Ukrainians, not the Russians. But what we're saying is we're giving them weapons that we believe are going to be disabled, destroyed, abandoned, in a manner in which Russia will recover them. That means Russia controls the battlefield, which means we know that Ukraine is going to lose. Yet we're going to give them the weapons anyway. If I were the Ukrainians, I'd refuse to operate this tank. It's literally a death trap. It's proof positive the United States doesn't care about the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian nation. All they care about is the optics of looking good to the American public. For Joe Biden to be able to tell the American public in the lead up to the 2024 election, I've done everything I could to help the Ukrainians be able to defend their territory. Giving them death traps is not doing everything you can to help out the Ukrainians.
Bereits vergangene Woche hast du, wie auch heute, gesagt, die deutschen Leopard-Panzer seien Todesfallen für ihre Besatzungen. Nun haben uns einige Zuschauerzuschriften erreicht, die anmerken, dass du dich nur auf die deutschen Panzer bezogen hast. Wie ist es mit den US-Kampfpanzern vom Typ M1-Abrams? Wie mit den britischen Challenger-Kampfpanzern? Sind diese besser geeignet für die Kriegsführung in der Ukraine als die deutschen Leopard-Panzer?
Well, first of all, I have to acknowledge that there have been several different versions of the Leopard tank sent to Ukraine. And some are quite old and literally unsuited for modern warfare. but Germany did send a handful of the 2A6s. I think the 2A6 is a good model, and it's being destroyed. It's being destroyed because it's the Russians have had decades to prepare for defeating German armor on the field of battle. So the Russian munitions penetrate the German armor like a hot knife through butter. But the Ukrainians also talk about the complexity of the system, that it's just too complex to be used by the Ukrainians in the environment they're operating on. It breaks down. It's a heavy tank. It's not mobile. It's very limited mobility, hampers it. The M1-Abrams and the British Challenger are even heavier than the Leopard tank, which means they'll have even more limited mobility. Their weaponry is not more advanced. Their armor isn't better. Even if you put the depleted uranium armor on the Abrams tank, the Russians have weapons that will destroy these tanks. The Challenger tank is supposed to have advanced Chauvam type armor, that also some applique armor. It would be slaughtered on the battlefield as well. The fact is, there has not been major advancements in Western tank technology. We were cutting edge at the end of the Cold War because we were preparing for large-scale armored conflict against an advanced Soviet enemy. But since that time, we've been tied down in conflicts that don't require large use of armor. And even if we do, for instance, the invasion of Iraq in 2003, we're going up against a technologically inferior enemy that doesn't require us to actively be pursuing new technology. Spending 20 years facing insurgents in Afghanistan and Iraq meant that the focus on armor that previously existed is no longer there. Nobody's spending the money necessary to produce new tanks. What they did is they simply upgraded existing variants. And the upgrades were all superficial in nature. They didn't take into account the reality of war. So, the German tank is horrible, horrible tank. I'm sorry, you German engineers, but you've produced a piece of crap. But you know it. You know you did. That's the thing. You know in your heart of hearts that you did. Your defense ministers know it too. Because if you were serious about building a tank, you would have taken the 1970s technology, the foundation of the Leopard tank, and put it aside and come up with a new design that takes into everything we've learned about armor warfare since then. But you took an old design and you just kept trying to improve it. And all you did is make it even worse. So the Leopard tank is 100% garbage. Don't worry, Germany. So is the M1 Abrams. So is the Challenger 2. Both those tanks date back to models that go back to the 1970s. Both of them represent modifications, adaptations, and so-called improvements. But they're not new tanks. They're simply old tanks with some bells and whistles attached to it. The Russians, on the other hand, have brand new tanks. The T-14 Armada, brand new design. The T-90 Breakthrough, a new design. These are new tanks with new technology designed to defeat, specifically designed to defeat the NATO tanks that Germany, the United States, and Britain have put on the battlefield. This is the reality. So, I guess the German people can feel good that they're just like America and Britain in this case. They suck when it comes to producing modern weaponry because they're not putting the resources into developing new tanks. Maybe they'll try in the future, but again, I have a funny feeling that they're going to be building something that's going to take years to develop. It's going to cost billions of dollars, and by the time it comes out of their factory, it'll just be an upgraded rolling death trap. It won't be a good tank.
Du sprichst von Panzern als Todesfallen. Kannst du da bitte mehr ins Detail gehen? Welchen Nutzen haben Panzer eigentlich in der modernen Kriegsführung? Wie werden Panzer dort eingesetzt?
Well, first of all, a tank is a weapon, and so it by in and of itself, it's useless. An isolated tank on the battlefield is a guaranteed death trap. I mean, it's literally it's part of, if used as part of a combined arms effort That means that it has infantry fighting vehicles that are screening against anti-tank guided missiles. It has artillery that's suppressing anti-guided tank guided missiles, and the tank using its own inherent armament system is suppressing enemy armor. If it works in conjunction with other combined armed forces, moves together with mass, meaning not ones and twos, but a mass of tanks that's overwhelming an enemy's defense, tank can be a very effective weapon. It's not. A lot of people think that if I'm in a tank, I'm going to live. No, no, no. You're going to die. Very likely you're going to die, especially in your leading elements, because you're going to receive a lot of fire. But if you advance and you have reserve units coming in, pushing through, the mass of the armor, the weight of the attack can achieve the breakthroughs. The Ukrainians simply lack the training to carry this out. We didn't train them. We, being the West, didn't train them properly for this. We gave them superficial training. The combined arms warfare that I'm talking about requires years to perfect, and then it takes months of continuous practice to maintain your proficiency in this. Ukraine never had that skill set, and when they went to Grafenwohr to receive the training, or if they were in France or in England, it was the most superficial training possible, trying to squeeze months of curriculum into weeks. Ukrainians were never able to do this. So it's a little misleading when you see the destroyed Leopard tanks, destroyed Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, destroyed Martyrs, etc., to say, oh, well, the Western equipment just sucks. No, I think what we're proving is that the Western equipment is not impervious to Russian firepower, and that given the opportunity, the Russians can kill every piece of equipment that the West has. But if the Western equipment is employed properly with properly trained troops who are able to use them in concert with combined arms operations, they're very deadly. The key to combat is establishing fire superiority over your enemy. This goes back to Napoleonic warfare, where troops would march up, stop, aim their muskets, fire, and they keep firing until one side knocks out more of the enemy than the other side. They now get fire superiority, and the enemy has to withdraw. That's war. Now, we combine that with maneuver. That's why tanks and infantry fighting vehicles are important, because it's not just lining up going at them. We can now maneuver around. We can flank. But the whole idea is to bring more firepower on the enemy than the enemy can put on you. If you can suppress the enemy, that is the human inclination. If somebody's shooting at you, most human beings want to go to ground, to hide. And when you're going to ground and you're hiding, you're not shooting back. So now the enemy has fire superiority over you. They're putting more fire on you. You're not suppressing their fire. Now they're free to maneuver, come closer to you. And if you don't withdraw, you'll be overrun and destroyed. Welcome to modern warfare. The Ukrainians are incapable of doing this right now because they weren't trained to do it. I would say that if the United States Marine Corps or the United States Army was going up against the Russians, this would be a different kind of war, a different battle with a different result, because we know how to fight. We know how to employ the weaponry. We would employ it with tactical proficiency. Would the battlefield be littered with destroyed U.S. Army and U.S. Marine Corps equipment? Absolutely. The Russians will be killing us at large numbers. A lot of our troops will be dead. But we will be focusing on the task of achieving fire superiority over the Russians, backed up by maneuver that I believe at the end of the day would compel the Russians to either die in place or retreat. Because the Russians right now are very good at defensive warfare, but the Russians have a problem with maneuver war. We've seen early on in the conflict where Russia has tried to move masses of armor against the Ukrainians and have been caught in fire sacks and ambushes, suffered tremendous casualties. Right now we have Russian troops that are being trained in training grounds ostensibly for this kind of combined arms warfare. We'll see whether or not Russia can pull it off, but it's a very difficult kind of warfare to do. If you can't do it, then your tanks become sort of mobile pillboxes. You're not going to be using the tanks in large numbers, But what you're going to do is have your tank hidden. As the enemy comes up, the tank will move out, will fire a couple rounds to suppress, and then pull back. But you're not seeing the large numbers of tanks moving forward, because if you do that without the adequate support, if you send tanks forward without screening, anti-tank weapons are going to kill them. The anti-tank weapon is very effective nowadays. If you don't have artillery coordinating its fires with the movement of the tank, suppressing the enemy, the tank is going to be taken out. You need infantry fighting vehicles moving forward, providing suppressive fires, but that requires a tremendous amount of training and coordination, which neither side appears to have at this point in time. So this is why, what we're seeing on the battlefield is sort of an adaptation of this technology. Tanks are being used in ones and twos. You're not seeing tanks coming out. When was the last time you saw 150 tanks online moving forward? You haven't. You haven't seen that because neither side at this point in time has shown a proclivity or the ability to do it.
Herzlichen Dank für deine Analysen, Scott. Wir freuen uns auf nächste Woche. Dankeschön.
All right, thank you. Have a good day.
Liebe Zuschauer, euch wie immer herzlichen Dank fürs Zusehen. Wenn euch die Sendung gefallen hat, teilt diese breit in den sozialen Medien, abonniert eben noch unseren Kanal Gegenpol und wenn ihr selbst Fragen habt, die wir Scott Ritter stellen sollen, dann schreibt sie uns in die Kommentare. Bis dahin, bis nächste Woche. Tschüss.